Before we begin, if you're someone who craves the truth hidden in shadows, the secrets locked behind steel doors, and the cases too dark for the nightly news, hit subscribe. You won't want to miss what comes next. The story opens on a freezing November night, the kind where the wind feels like sharp glass against the skin. Sirens echoed across the Colorado desert as a convoy of unmarked black SUVs raced toward the country's most secretive federal Supermax prison, ADX Florence. Inside the lead vehicle, U.S. Marshal Elise Grant gripped the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles blanched. She'd seen dangerous criminals before, serial killers, cartel lieutenants, violent fugitives, but nothing compared to the man they were bringing in tonight. Damon Riker, former military intelligence specialist, convicted of orchestrating 3 precision kidnappings of high-ranking financial executives. He wasn't a murderer, not officially, but every victim disappeared without a trace. Rumor inside law enforcement circles whispered that Riker operated with a disciplined coldness no one could break, not even during interrogations. But that wasn't why Elise's pulse thudded in her throat. What terrified her was the message Riker had passed to a guard during his last transfer. "You're locking me in the wrong cage. The real threat isn't me." Minutes later, security cameras at the holding facility shorted out. A guard collapsed in the hallway, and Riker, after 7 years of silence, had begun to smile. Now, the marshals were delivering him to the one place where silence wasn't punishment, it was survival. As they arrived at the massive concrete fortress of ADX Florence, built like a tomb carved into stone, the air grew unnervingly still. Staff called it the Alcatraz of the Rockies. 23-hour isolation cells, sound-dampening walls, and steel doors with slots barely wide enough to pass a food tray. No inmate had ever escaped. Few ever spoke again without trembling. Riker stepped out of the SUV calmly, hands cuffed, eyes locked on the building ahead. He looked almost curious. Elise watched him closely as he was escorted through 5 security checkpoints, retinal scans, and metal detectors designed to detect even a paperclip. Nothing about his behavior resembled a man facing decades of silent captivity. If anything, he looked like he'd been waiting for this. Inside the prison, Warden Marcus Doyle reviewed the intake file, frowning at the red-marked pages. Riker was classified, extreme isolation required, a rare designation reserved for prisoners capable of influencing external criminal networks even from solitary confinement. Yet the warden's concern wasn't his intelligence. It was the message delivered earlier by federal investigators. Riker knows something, and if he talks, that might expose a threat we can't control. That vague warning hung in the air like poison. When they walked Riker to his cell, a narrow concrete chamber with a steel bed frame, a bolted desk, and a small window that showed nothing but sky, he paused at the threshold. He turned slowly toward Elise and the warden, his voice low and unsettlingly calm. "You think this place keeps people in," he said, "but you never consider what it keeps out." Elise stepped back. The warden stiffened. Riker stepped into the cell without another word, and the thick steel door sealed shut with a final, echoing thud. The first night passed without incident, until the surveillance operators noticed something wrong. Every inmate in Riker's wing followed a strict routine. Wake, eat, sit, sleep, repeat. But Riker didn't move like the others. He paced the exact same number of steps every hour, paused for the exact same number of seconds, and then stared directly at the camera as if he knew the rhythm of the security sweeps. On the second night, the power in Wing D flickered. A rare failure. 43 cameras went dark for 6 seconds. When the feed came back online, Riker was sitting cross-legged on the floor, eyes closed, like nothing had happened. But something had. A prison technician discovered a small strip of metal, barely the size of a fingernail, wedged inside the electrical junction panel. It was placed there deliberately, skillfully, impossible for any inmate to access, unless they'd had help from someone on the inside. Elise was called back immediately. By the time she arrived, the warden handed her the piece of metal in a sealed evidence bag, whispering, "Riker's been here less than 48 hours. And someone's already working with him." But before Elise could respond, an alarm blared through the prison, a sound so rare no one had heard it in years. A cell had been breached. She ran down the hallway, heart pounding. Officers swarmed the area. When they reached Riker's cell door, they saw something none of them could explain. The inside locks had been disabled from within, and Riker was gone. Yet his cell was still sealed shut. And on the concrete floor, etched with something sharp, was a single sentence. "You brought me here too late." Sirens shrieked through the entire Supermax like the walls themselves were screaming. Officers sprinted down hallways, keys rattling, radios buzzing with panicked voices. In a place built on absolute control, steel, concrete, silence, chaos was the one thing no one was trained to handle. Warden Marcus Doyle shoved through the crowd toward Riker's cell, his face pale, his voice tight. "How is that door sealed if he's not inside?" he barked. No one had an answer. Elise Grant arrived seconds later, her breathing heavy from running. She pressed her face against the narrow window of the steel door. Inside was an empty concrete box. The bed undisturbed. The sink stainless and clean. No shadows. No corners to hide in. But the locks, the internal deadbolts that could only be released with a remote command from the control room, were still engaged. Meaning the door never opened. Meaning he didn't walk out. Meaning he had simply vanished. "This is impossible," the warden muttered. "No one disappears from ADX." Elise crouched, staring at the message scratched into the floor. The letters were carved deep into the concrete, straight and precise, like someone who didn't rush. Someone who knew exactly how much danger was already coming. "You brought me here too late." She photographed it, her hands trembling. "Clear this entire wing," she ordered. "And pull every camera file from the last 12 hours. If Riker isn't in this building, I want every roadblock within 50 miles activated. Now." The officers moved, but there was unease in their faces. They'd seen death, violence, riots. But a prisoner vanishing inside a sealed cell? That rattled them in a way bullets never could. Control room, 9 minutes later. Banks of screens flickered as Elise and the warden reviewed camera footage. Everything looked as it should. Lights dimming at night. Officers doing rounds. Inmates motionless in their tiny cells. Then they reached the moment of the breach. At 2 hours 14 minutes and 7 seconds, the lights in Wing D flickered. At 2 hours 14 minutes and 8 seconds, they dimmed again. At 2 hours 14 minutes and 9 seconds, the screen on Riker's camera blurred, not blacked out, not glitched, blurred, like heat distortion. At 2 hours 14 minutes and 10 seconds, Riker stood in the center of his cell. At 02:14:11 nothing. No figure. No movement. Just an empty room. At 2 hours 14 minutes and 12 seconds, the blur cleared. At 2 hours 14 minutes and 13 seconds, the bed frame trembled, a vibration so subtle the warden had to rewind it twice to notice, as if something heavy had been lifted from it. At 2 hours 14 minutes and 14 seconds, everything returned to normal. "He didn't escape," Elise whispered. "He was removed." "Removed by who?" the warden snapped. "Removed how?" Elise didn't answer, because she knew the real question was why. They gathered the emergency security team in the administrative wing. A dozen officers stood ready, weapons holstered, vests secured, faces grim. Elise held up the evidence bag containing the fingernail-sized strip of metal they'd found earlier, the one inserted into a junction box only an engineer or a highly trained operative could access. "This didn't come from any prison equipment," she said. "This is military-grade circuitry. And the way it was placed, it wasn't meant to break anything. It was meant to signal." "To who?" an officer asked. "Whoever was waiting for him." The warden exhaled sharply. "You're telling me Riker arranged for an inside extraction? From ADX? Do you know how insane that sounds?" Elise stared at him hard. "Everything about this man is insane," she said. "But the timing, the precision, and that message on the floor, none of this is random. Something is happening outside these walls. Something he expected." The warden was about to argue when every radio in the room crackled at once. "Dispatch to all units. We have a situation at the front perimeter. You need to see this." Elise and the warden exchanged looks and hurried through the corridor to the surveillance hub overlooking the entrance gate. On the screen, 3 security trucks were stopped at the outer checkpoint. The guards inside them were slumped over, unconscious. No visible injuries. No signs of struggle. And on each of their chests was a small black rectangle, identical in size to the piece of metal found inside the junction box. The warden's voice broke. "This is coordinated." Elise leaned closer to the screen. "No," she corrected softly. "This is a warning." They rushed back into the control room as more reports poured in. A supply drone malfunctioned and fell out of the sky, fried internally. A power substation a mile away experienced a surge. The prison's external signal jammers, designed to block electronic communication, had shut down without triggering a single alarm. The facility wasn't losing control. It was being isolated. Someone on the outside was cutting the prison off, inch by inch from the rest of the world. And then a trembling guard ran into the room. "Warden, you need to come to the roof. Now." They climbed the emergency stairwell, boots pounding, breath heavy. When they burst onto the cold rooftop, they froze. A solitary object sat in the center of the gravel, a small encrypted tablet, military issue, blinking with a single notification. Elise knelt and tapped the screen. A video opened. And there he was, Damon Riker, sitting calmly in the back of an unknown vehicle, hands no longer cuffed. He leaned forward, eyes piercing the camera. "Everything I said was true," he whispered. "And you're already running out of time." Elise's heart slammed, because through the vehicle window behind Riker, she saw something that made her blood run cold. An object. A person. And a symbol. Something she recognized immediately. Something tied to a classified case she swore never to speak of again. Riker's voice dropped to a murmur. "This isn't an escape," he said. "It's a retrieval." The video cut to black, and Elise felt the rooftop tilt beneath her feet, because she knew exactly what they had just seen, and exactly who had taken him. The rooftop fell into a suffocating silence. Elise stared at the blank tablet screen, her pulse rattling in her ears. She knew the symbol she'd seen behind Riker, a black triangle with a hollow center. Clean lines. Military sharp. An insignia scraped from the classified files of a case that had nearly destroyed her career. Project Helios. A covert intelligence program that supposedly shut down 6 years ago after a whistleblower exposed unauthorized surveillance of foreign banks, political figures, and, in one unconfirmed case, an entire small town that vanished off the map for 3 days. The whistleblower disappeared. The program was buried so deep that not even congressional investigators could confirm it existed. And Damon Riker had been one of its top field engineers. Warden Doyle stepped forward, voice shaking. "Grant, what are we dealing with?" Elise inhaled slowly, the cold air burning her lungs. "Something we were never supposed to talk about again." The command center erupted into controlled panic. Federal agents arrived within the hour, sweeping the prison, locking down every entrance, running bioscans and forensic sweeps. But Elise noticed something unsettling. None of them seemed surprised. In fact, they moved with the precision of people following a plan. She pulled aside Agent Rowan, a man she hadn't seen since the Helios hearings. His face was older now, drawn lines, grayed hair, but his voice still carried the manufactured calm she hated. "You already knew," she said quietly. "You knew he'd be taken." Rowan didn't deny it. He had information that couldn't stay in open jurisdiction. "You put him in ADX knowing someone would break him out?" "We didn't break him out," Rowan corrected. "We recovered him." Elise's anger surged. "You kidnapped a federal prisoner from a federal facility." Rowan's expression didn't change. "Grant, listen carefully. Riker wasn't your suspect. He wasn't a criminal mastermind. He wasn't even working alone. He was a containment asset. And he was holding information that, if leaked, would destabilize multiple international investigations." "Stop speaking in riddles," she snapped. Rowan nodded to one of his agents, who pulled up a secure video feed on a portable screen. It showed satellite footage, grainy, black and white, of an isolated warehouse somewhere in Nevada. Then another angle, a shipping yard in Rotterdam. Then another, A remote snowy compound in Norway. In every frame, cleared personnel in tactical black moved with military precision. Same insignia. Same pattern. Same black triangle. Rowan spoke softly. Someone has been taking people. High-value targets. Asset handlers. Financial code analysts. Intelligence runners. No bodies. No traces. They don't kill. They collect. Collect for what? Elise asked. Rowan hesitated. Elise, they're building something. Her stomach twisted. And Riker knew? He helped design the tracking systems we use to monitor early activity. But he also designed the countermeasures they're using today. So, he switched sides. No, Rowan whispered. He never picked a side. Riker works only for one thing, whatever he believes the future threat is. Elise's gut tightened. Then what did he mean by too late? Rowan looked away, jaw set. We just found out. A red alert flashed across the control room. A communications officer yelled from behind a console. Director Rowan, you need to see this. Everyone crowded around the main monitor. A live feed filled the screen. Drone footage. A desert highway somewhere in the southwest. A convoy of black vehicles moving in formation. Fast, deliberate, untraceable. The same one Riker had been in. Track it, Rowan ordered. We can't, the technician said. They're emitting a signal jam strong enough to blind every satellite we have above them. Then the camera flickered. The convoy vehicles slowed. They entered a vast fenced compound, one that didn't appear on any map. Elise felt her breath catch. The compound wasn't new. She recognized the layout instantly. Rowan, she whispered, that's Helios Site 4. I thought it was dismantled. It was, Rowan said hoarsely. Someone rebuilt it. The drone cameras zoomed in. Guards in matte black armor. Watchtowers. Floodlights. A steel subterranean entrance. And then, Riker stepped out of one of the vehicles, escorted by two armored figures. He wasn't resisting. In fact, he looked right at the drone, like he knew Elise would be watching. Then the compound doors opened, revealing the impossible. Rows of sealed glass pods. Inside them, people. Alive. Unharmed. Hooked to data ports, neural readers, and biometric scanners. Elise staggered back. They're not collecting bodies, she whispered. They're collecting minds. The feed cut. Static. Silence. Rowan stared at the blank screen. We needed him to tell us why. But now he's inside. And we've lost the only man who understood what they're building. Elise closed her eyes, piecing together every clue Riker had left. The circuits. The message. The precision. He wasn't running, she said softly. He was returning. To what? Rowan asked. Elise opened her eyes, and her voice came out barely above a whisper. To finish what you started. The warden approached timidly. What happens now? Elise stared out the window at the cold Colorado desert where the sun was just beginning to rise. Riker's warning echoed in her mind. You're already running out of time. We find him, she said. And we find out what Helios is building before they use it. Rowan frowned. Do you know what happens if we interfere? Elise stepped toward the exit. I know what happens if we don't. She reached the door, then stopped. And when we catch him, she added, I'm getting answers. All of them. She walked out, leaving silence behind her. But one thought clung to every person in that room. If this story was already spiraling out of control, what came next would be far worse. If you think this story was intense, you're not ready for the next one. Hit subscribe so you don't miss it.